Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kate Mosse. I'm a novelist and a playwright and a member of the board here. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our fantastic third space, The Shed, where we are camped out until the Dorfman reopens next year. I think some of you will have been to these national, very good start, histories before, where just two actors who've been very much part of the 50-year history of the National Theatre, not all 50 years, I hasten to add, come and just answer the same set of questions. I'm sure some of you have been here before. So it's an enormous pleasure to welcome Kenneth Cranham and Lesley Manville. And we're going to start right at the beginning, because the question was called Beginnings, and I'm going to start with you, Ken. Your very first memory of the National, was it an audition? Was it seeing Chichester? Was it here?
Well, as a teenager, the heroes that I had, and I mean heroes, were Marlon Brando, the young Marlon Brando, the young Bob Dylan, the young Elvis Presley. But the only British, English hero I had was Laurence Olivier. He thrilled me endlessly. I thought he was extraordinary. And my first connections with the National Theatre were because of him. And I ended up auditioning to be in the company at the National Theatre, and I actually was auditioned by Olivier himself.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes.
That's a memory.
Oh, yeah. And at the time, all of the cigarette machines in the Old Vic, the only cigarettes they contained were Olivier cigarettes. I mean, it was a thing of those days that there were Du Maurier cigarettes and there were Olivier cigarettes. And Anne Robinson, who was the casting director at the time, bowed backwards onto the stage saying, "Sir, we'll see you now." And I came onto the stage and I did a speech, Prince Hal, "I know you all and will a while uphold the unyoked humour." Anyway, that one. Where he confides in the audience that he's going to be all right, don't worry. He's not going to be with these terrible people, Falstaff and the rest. And I did the speech, and Olivier walked to the front and talked to me about acting in the theatre. I'd actually done quite a lot at that point, but you know, I listened to him, and he asked me to do the speech again, and then he exited up the aisle of the theatre, and he performed Falstaff exiting. And he was going, "Good night, sweet boy." And I immediately went to the roof of the theatre and saw myself on stage.
Oh.
And I was already telling the anecdotes. I just wasn't there at all. I mean, you don't often confront your heroes in a situation like that. So that was my start. I didn't get into the company or anything. That all happened later. Anyway.
But how, I mean, that's a perfect story to kick us off with the 50 years of the theatre and Olivier. Lesley, what about you? Did you get auditioned by some great person, or what was your first experience?
I must have got auditioned, but I actually worked at the National when it was at the Old Vic. And I know you must all be thinking, goodness me, she can't possibly be that old.
You were all thinking that, weren't you?
A, I am, and but B, I was very young. I think I was 18 when I went there to do a production of the play of The Marriage of Figaro, which was written by Beaumarchais, and Jonathan Miller was directing it, who I got a complete crush on. He must be 25 years older than me, but I just adored him. And I think I was probably pretty hopeless. I mean, I had no idea about acting really at that point. I just kind of, you know, did myself. And
you hadn't come out of drama school, you?
No, I'd been to a stage school for about 6 months, and you know, I was pretty much an airhead, really. But thankfully, Jonathan cast me in this, and I must have not been doing it right, because he used to show me how to do it, which, of course, if a director did that now, I'd kick him in the shins, or her. But he was saying, "No, don't do it like that, do it like this." And I used to think, "Oh, that's so great that he's showing me how to do it." How kind of him to show me how to do it. But it was a great experience, and we did it at the Old Vic and on tour a little bit. And one of the things I remember is that the stage door used to be around the other side to the building where it is now, wasn't it? It was on the main road, the stage door, and you used to go downstairs, And what I was so impressed with was that there was a cafe. And I just got this memory of thinking it was absolutely extraordinary that you could get steak and salad. It's the things that, you know, things that kind of impress you when you're very young. But it was a fantastic job.
Who else was in the company for that?
Gorn Granger, Gemma Jones, Nicola Paget. Yeah, and it was a lovely production. But I'd had no experience of the National before that. No. And didn't really, I don't think really even at that time, because I hadn't been to RADA or I didn't quite understand the importance of the place.
Do you think maybe that's how you could audition and get in, because you weren't
yes.
quaking? Suppose you knew it was Olivier auditioning you and that there was a lot at stake.
Mm. Yeah, I didn't know who anybody was. I didn't know who Jonathan Miller was. I just thought he was gorgeous.
I think that's as good a way of making your decisions. People you fancy, I'm sure. Is that how you first got in the company? People you fancied?
Well, when I was at drama school, people had... The company then that was led by Olivier at the Old Vic was an extraordinary company. I went to see as many of those productions as I could. I saw Much Ado About Nothing 4 times. That was Maggie Smith and Robert Stevens, and the supporting cast had Finney, Jacoby, McKellen, all the way down through the ranks. It was a wonderful company, and everybody I was at drama school with had Robert Stevens as a hero, and there was a page of Vogue that everyone had torn out and had it on their wall. But I had seen a production of The Crucible at the Old Vic, directed by Olivier, and I've just suddenly thought, because there was this whole thing where Olivier went to the Royal Court with Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe, and Miller was so impressed by Look Back in Anger that Olivier went to John Osborne and said, "Do you think you could write me something?" And he wrote him The Entertainer, which was an extraordinary thing, and an extraordinary... That film of The Entertainer will always exist as a monument to Olivier, it really will. And I suppose, it was reciprocation that he was doing perhaps Arthur Miller's greatest play, The Crucible, he was directing himself. And Colin Blakely played Proctor. And Colin Blakely was so moving. It was a sort of emotional reaction you would normally only get from Janis Joplin or something, that I felt about his performance as Proctor. And he became my hero. He became the actor that I sort of wanted to be. I wanted to be as emotionally effective as that. And him and Frank Finlay were the two actors who I thought came from a background more like mine. There wasn't a barrier to them. But Frank Finlay, as life went on, became more like Liberace. You know, he became a rather sort of coiffured grand actor. And because he was an extraordinary Iago to Olivier's Othello. But Colin Blakely was my man, and I got years later to do The Dumb Waiter with him, a two-hander on the television, and I got to do The Birthday Party, and I played Stanley and he played McCann, with Pinter playing Goldberg. So I got to work with him twice. You see, if I was an athlete or a dancer, you wouldn't get to work with the people who astonished you, because by the time you were working, they'd be too old. But with acting, you can. You can get to work with these people that you loved.
Yeah, that's it. And so, I mean, we're talking about some of the great names, the great famous actors and directors. But the next question is the unsung heroes or heroines of the National Theatre. Lesley, who's yours, or who are your gang of unsung people?
Well, I've got to say Linda on the stage door, really. I mean, she probably is a sung hero, though, but she's been at the National since it was at the Old Vic, although I don't remember her there. But so she's worked here for 30 odd years. And I think all of that is so important, because she's just so unbelievably welcoming to everybody. And she knows everything that's going on, you know, in the proper way, you know. I don't mean as a gossip. I mean as, you know, she knows who's coming in that day, who isn't, who this, and she runs a really nice, happy ship. And it is important when you walk into a theatre and you're coming in at maybe, you know, 12 o'clock on a matinee day, and you know you're going to be there for at least 10 hours, that you start the day with somebody who takes the time to look at you and talk to you and ask you how you are and talk about proper things. You know, I've had extraordinary conversations with Linda about all sorts of stuff. And
you know we're recording this, don't you?
But yeah, she's just, and all of her team, you know, she gets to cast her team. So, and she always gets people who are equally amenable. But I think that immediate face for the, you know, the huge number of people and departments that work here, that we always get to see.
Start the day well.
Start the day well, and it's important. But having said that, you know, goodness me, there are so many people that work here. You know, I could go on and on, but I picked one, and so it would be Linda. Yeah.
Ken?
Well, mine, because I once was in a permanent company here for 2.5 years. I was here solidly for 2.5 years. And then you really, all sorts, and I have to say that there's all sorts of things I'm grateful to this building for, which I couldn't be grateful to any other building for, in the access that it gave you to all sorts of facilities and lights and music, and if you wanted to put your own platform show together, which I did, they made everything available. And I can't think of another theatre that does that. But my unsung hero, but he was a man who was here all the time I was here, called Michael Mayhew, who designed all of the posters. He did all the photographs. And he's married now to Brenda Blethyn. They had a very long courtship, didn't they?
About 40 years.
There's no need to rush.
It's true. 40 years, and then they got married.
Then they got married, yes, and she goes on about him now. My husband, she's very pleased with it all. And he's like Timothy Spall in that he speaks an old-fashioned London, which is very comforting. When people speak like the old-fashioned London tribes, they're like the northern tribes. They're warm people. You know, those old Londoners that call you angel and things like that. Yeah. That's what Michael Mayhew was like. And he put all sorts of stuff my way in terms of me taking photographs and things like that. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the wonderful things about these national histories is that everybody has chosen somebody different. And it's clear quite how many people have influenced so many actors' lives. It's a wonderful thing. So in terms of individual performances that you've seen, I mean, you've touched on a couple already, Ken. Can you pick out one or two people that when you saw them, you just thought, that's it, you know, that's the sort of actor I want
definitely Gordon Granger in that production of The Marriage of Figaro. He did look strikingly gorgeous and handsome. And I sound very...
As if you're looking for a boyfriend.
I know, I'm just referring to lovely men, aren't I? But no, he was wonderful. He played the hero, and he was very dashing and strong. And of course, you know, he must be one of the actors that I've known the longest. I mean, he's a friend of mine still. So, and whenever we meet, we always talk about that production and that time, and you know, I mean, I was very young and he was relatively young, I suppose, but yeah, that performance was wonderful. I also I've seen so much here, and of course sometimes it's hard to remember individual performances. I sadly don't keep a diary, which I wish I did, but I do remember seeing my dear friend Deborah Finlay in Winter's Tale playing Paulina, and she took my breath away. I mean, it was just, it was a sort of modern dress production, and she walked on with this fabulous coat and this suitcase, and she was the kind of, this brilliant, played her as a brilliant businesswoman. Right. That was a striking performance. And sometimes it's fragments of people, isn't it? You just remember moments. And I did an Ibsen play here called Pillars of the Community, and I remember playing a scene with Briege Brennan, and we had this sort of intimate scene between these two women in this household, and I loved playing it, and what I took from her, there's a fantastic stillness about her work and a subtlety, and if you are in close proximity with her, you just see this whole world going on without it being demonstrated. So those performances or moments of performances.
Does it change your performance? Is that how, as a young actor, you learn, or is there a danger in sort of copying somebody? I mean, how does it actually work when you're acting?
Well, I think that you do get influenced by people, and that's not a bad thing, and nothing to be ashamed of. I wouldn't ever try and copy, but you know, the way that Debbie Finlay came to create that character, it was I think it was very much of its time, you know, and certainly with Briege, I think you admire performers, and it sort of happens by osmosis, you know, and I think that around that time, I was beginning to have a certain set of feelings about my work on film, which is not what we're discussing today, but certainly what Briege was doing was an interesting leap into that other side of my career, which was not to do with theatre. And
Ken, you've already mentioned Colin Blakely and Robert Stephens, and you were telling me before that Robert Stephens you thought was probably the first actor ever to go to the gym. So were they part of the performances you were admiring, or were there other towering performances?
Well, you can see I've been a lot to the gym. No, what
he inspired you, clearly.
When he played Atahualpa, the sun god, he created... I mean, Olivier went to the gym to play Othello, and did remarkably well. I think he was quite old then. I don't know how old he was. But he created, Robert Stephens, this extraordinary godlike figure. Little Finch, I remember him saying. And, but he fell apart in just as spectacular a manner. And you know, actually ran to fat and seed and everything. Robert Stephens went through all of these sort of changes. He was once married to Maggie Smith, and I remember him being in the Royal Court in the pub next door in a white Levi suit, and Dennis Waterman getting down on his hands and knees and kissing his feet. Now there's an image.
There is an image, yes. Could be, well, I don't think we could even cope with that image. No. But other great performances, individual performances that you remember from...
Well, I managed... one of the actors that I really loved, who worked here quite a bit, was Paul Schofield. And it was great to see him as many times as I got to see him. And it was great to get to see Olivier work on stage. Yeah. I mean, as I said, he was a big hero, and I actually slept outside the Old Vic to get one of the tickets in the next morning. Did you? I walked from West Norwood to the Old Vic and lay in the grit with lorries going past until 10 in the morning and bought my ticket. I went to drama school and said to the director, the teacher, I said, I had to go to the doctor. And one of the other students had already told him that I was queuing for a ticket for Olivier. and I got into terrible trouble, but at the same time, they were quite proud of me. At the same time. And I came and saw the show that night, and he did this extraordinary entrance at the beginning of the thing, and he was shiny and black and fluid, and he moved like a god. Wow. Soon after that, I fell deeply asleep. I never saw another thing. So I was right at the top in the gods in the heat. So, you know, that was it.
So both the best performance you ever saw and the best performance you never did see.
Exactly.
Yes. And that's very interesting because, of course, the Olivier Othello's come up several times, and people saying, you know, how would it seem now? I mean, it's unthinkable now, obviously. But did it feel, the small amount of it you saw, powerful and exciting?
Yeah, extraordinary. I mean, that statue that they've got here of Olivier, just on the Thames here, looks like Kenny Everett playing a cobweb. I don't know what they think that represents at all. Olivier was a colossus, take it from me.
And you said, you know, your first audition for the company, you didn't get in. But what then obviously you've worked here so much over the intervening years. So what is your most fulfilling production that you've been part of, the one you most love, either of you? jump in?
Lesley?
Well, after The Marriage of Figaro, I must have made such a lasting impression because it was 30 years before they asked me back.
But they remembered you.
They remember me. And since then, I have worked here a lot. But
that is quite odd, isn't it? Do you
It
feel
is.
as an actor like, what's my agent doing, or?
well, the truth
Is it
is,
the
I mean,
work, maybe?
I was doing a lot at the Royal Court.
Right, so you
and
became one of their
I
gang.
sort of did become a bit of a Royal Courtite. And then I did do a couple of seasons at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I was also making films with Mike Leigh. And anybody who knows about Mike Leigh, you make a film and it's not 6 weeks, it's 9 months if you make a film with him. So I was not available for 30 years.
And very young, as well as we've established.
And very,
Yes.
obviously, a baby. So I suppose the thing, I mean, I haven't done any plays here that I've thought, well, that one wasn't so good, and so that doesn't. They all feature highly for me and rank very highly. But I suppose because it was the one that brought me back after 30 years, and it was an exceptional piece of theatre, I'd have to say his Dark Materials.
Yes.
And we did it because of the complexity of the set, and it was in 2 parts. We could only do it not in repertoire, which of course every play here is normally in repertoire. So we did a solid 5-month run. But I just loved it, and the full use of the Olivier stage with the drum coming up and going down, and and it was so technical and physical, and it was just and obviously you had completely adoring audiences.
Yes.
Every day.
And cues for returns in that old-fashioned way, as you know.
Yes, yeah. So that was remarkable, and such a great part, this ghastly but glamorous Mrs. Coulter. So, there was nothing about it that I didn't love. No,
And of course, the very, now looking at Warhorse and how important that's become, that sort of sense of puppetry and actors, and this being not normal, but utterly accepted. But of course, that was quite groundbreaking, the bits of puppetry, wasn't it?
Oh, yes.
His Dark Materials. People
Yes.
forget that was the first.
That was going on then.
We used to have to go and see the World Theatre Season to see stuff like
Exactly,
that.
yes,
we
yes.
didn't produce that sort of stuff ourselves. And so you'd have to go and see something from Japan or whatever.
Yes, yes.
And now we're world beaters.
World beaters, absolutely.
That's true.
And what about you? You're sort of, you said at one point you worked here for 2.5 years, so you must have many, many productions.
So many things. I mean, one of the things I did was the Passion in the Cottesloe, which was a take on the old guildsmen putting on nativity plays and whatever religious plays for working folk, and it was Tony Harrison put it all into sort of rhyming couplets and language. It was all very northern. I played Peter, and when I had to deny Christ, it was a woman, thy word and thy wine do not waste. Of his company never was I kenned. Thou hast mismarked me, truly me trust. And that's what it was like, the language. It was wonderful. But all of the crowd used to gather around every scene that was being played, so that when you watched your friends, the other actors, playing these scenes, you saw all the faces, a sort of tapestry of humanity in light around each grouping. And one afternoon after doing the show, there was a bunch of nuns in the audience, and they couldn't find their way out of the Cottesloe. I mean, this building is a mystery. Most people can't find their way around here. But and so I gathered them and took them out to the banks of the Thames. And one of them said to me, "We might have known that Peter would have helped us."
Have you ever found yourself in, well, not found yourself, that sounds as if you were lost and ambled on to another set, but in productions here that wouldn't have been ever something that you would have thought, yes, I really want to be in that, or I really want to be in that, but a clever director and writer thinking, Kenneth Cranham's the right person, Lesley Manville's the right person. Has that happened to you here, or do you tend to be in the repertoire you would be most associated with?
Well, what happens to us quite a lot, and I don't know if this happens as much to you, Lesley, but sometimes they're trying to get Bob Peck. and Bob Peck gets a Spielberg film, and so suddenly it comes to you. You know, no, a lot of it's often like that. It's often come to you accidentally, but that happened with The Inspector and Inspector Calls, which I went on to perform 800 times. So it became mine in the end.
God, 800. How do you, I mean, this is speaking as obviously not an actor in any way. How do you not get bored with doing 800, you know, that same emotional palette?
It's not that. It's just
what does that equal in terms of months or years?
Oh God, that's over 2 years, isn't it? That would be 2.5 years, something like that. I don't know.
Amazing.
But
to have that same.
I mean, it happens a lot with musicals that people go a length like that, but not often with a straight play.
Did it go into the West End?
I did it in the West End. I did a British tour. I did Broadway.
So
I
you
did
weren't
the West
bored,
End.
you
Part of the American, and also the production was so difficult for the actor that I always felt that I had to attack the production every night, and every night I felt that I beat it. That's what it felt like, and so it wasn't. You're not going to get bored in something like that. And also, my Mrs. Burlings, which is the chief female character, included Barbara Lee Hunt, Judy Parfitt, Rosemary Harris, and Sian Phillips.
Wow. Oh well.
I mean, if I had been Simon Callow, I would have written 5 or 6 books.
Yes. Yes, it would have been Bob Peck and his leading lady.
One for each.
God, that's very. Is that your experience as well? That sometimes there's this sort of, not lottery, but who's available and who's not available. That you know the people that you're seen in the same way as.
I've worked here with Nick Heitner twice, so I don't think he offered it to somebody else before me. Yes. And Howard Davis, who I'd worked with at the RSC before, so I don't know that, and Mike Lee, and then Marianne Elliott, who I didn't know at all. We did the Ibsen, Pillars of the Community. No, I don't know. Who knows? Only Wendy Spon will be able to, head of casting, only she'll be able to answer that question.
I'm very surprised that actually she hasn't been everybody's unsung hero.
Well,
all the way through.
She's just become mine.
Yes, missed a trick there, chaps. So the next question was that, you know, about the iconic productions, the productions that stand in the National Theatre's history that you missed. Now, of course, I imagine yours, bizarrely, is both Othello and not, because you did half see it and didn't. But,
yeah, I am.
Are there other, you know, those great productions that sit in the sort of the canon of the National Theatre that you wish you'd seen?
Well, there was an extraordinary production called Madras House, which was a Granville Barker play, which they did in the Olivier, and again used the Olivier at its best and at grandest. And I saw that and I thought, this is wonderful. And Mark McManus, for some reason, couldn't do it. And I took over a one-scene part in that. Yeah. And with only one rehearsal, I went on to an Olivier audience. Yeah. I got a big laugh at my first scene ever in that play. And Ronald Pickup turned up stage and went, it was great to see this production and then find myself in it.
Yes, because for those of us who are audience members as opposed to on the stage, the idea that you are all having these jokes with each other when we don't know, it's very attractive, isn't it? The idea that every night it's slightly different because there's some sort of little piece of work.
Well, if you were interviewing Michael Gambon now, you could have an hour and a half just talking about that. Yes.
All the gags he's pulled on
all
other
the gags
people.
he pulls on people, yeah.
And what about, you know, have you got one of those productions or a couple that you've thought, God, I wish I'd been in the audience that first night.
Well, lots, because I do admit you can't see everything, but I had trouble remembering in particular. But I do wish, I was lucky enough to be working with Nick Heitner and a team of people putting together what will be the show that goes out live on the 2nd of November. You know, constructing what the evening will, and we looked at a lot of archive footage from the old, because of course that's all that there is of that. There's just archive footage, but it was so wonderful looking at clips of Maggie Smith and Judi Dench, and I just wish I'd have seen more of that, more of those plays. I mean, I was either too young or kind of wasn't quite in that zone, but was it Maggie Smith in The Beau Stratagem? Is that one of, yes, I wish there's some clip footage of her doing that, which will be on the telly on the 2nd. It just looks extraordinary, and I'd have loved to see her do that. And Coward. There's a clip of her in a Coward play. You know, I'd love to have seen that. But there's so many things here that you don't see, that you know are wonderful, and you can't see everything.
And of course, that's one of the extraordinary things about NT Live that's been pioneered here by Nick Heitner and everybody here. The idea that some of those great performances that are happening live, that most of us or some of us have been lucky to see, now are being seen by millions of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Have you done one of those, Lesley?
No.
Well, they're quite extraordinary because they have a bank of cameras. When we used to do television plays, the television cameras used to be like Daleks.
Yes.
And we're actually in the room with you,
Yes.
these sort of monsters wandering about. And you got very good at spotting when the red light was on and stuff like that, didn't you, all of that? But it was like that, to do this at the National Theatre. We did the Cherry Orchard, and it went out to cinemas as we did it. And a wonderful thing happened to me, because my wife and daughter had to go down to Bristol for the day, and I thought they were going to miss it. But they managed to get back into town in time. And in the interval, my mobile went and they phoned me up from a cinema and said, "Oh, it's fantastic." So that's a sort of unique thing that can happen with modern day technology. You can actually be phoned up on your mobile in the middle of a live broadcast of a play.
The next question that's been asked of everybody, I notice has been rewritten since the beginning. So the beginning of doing National Histories, it was, if you were going to a fancy dress party, what costume would you wear? And every single self-respecting actor went, I would never go to a fancy dress party at all. So it's now been written, which costume from either of your own or of the National Theatre would you most like to borrow or have, or piece of clothing?
Well, I do have one. I have to say the costume department here is phenomenal, and the team of people who actually make the clothes are extraordinary seamstresses. And there was a beautiful I did The Alchemist here with the late Ian Richardson and Alex Jennings and Simon Russell Beale, and I played Doll Common. And in one of the scenes when she's flirting with I forget the character's name, but Ian Richardson's character, Mark Thompson, who designed it, decided to dress me up looking like Audrey Hepburn as Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's. So they made me this amazing little black dress that absolutely looked like the one she wore in the film. It was gorgeous, and of course it was bespoke, it was made for me, and just lovely. And at the end of the production, I said I'd really love to buy the dress, and they said some sum that was really quite high, and it was worked out on the hours that this person had spent making it. So I said, I can't really afford that. I said, well, look, I'll leave it for a while. Cut to a few years later, I came back, and I said to somebody about, is that dress still on? They said, oh yeah, no, nothing's really happened. Oh, you can have it now for 50 quid.
Patience.
I'm glad I waited a couple of years. So I've got this beauty, and it's the perfect little black dress to wear out. But I also bought, when I did his Dark Materials, they bought me a fabulous pair of Vivienne Westwood boots to play Mrs. Coulter. And
Have you got them?
I bought those as well.
And do you find that you can wear them out, just out? Or is it so associated with being on stage that they become too costumey?
Well, every time I put them on, they've put a little... they were a pair of boots that had buckle. And so, of course, a quick change was a nightmare, because we were doing buckles, and they had about 12 people doing all the buckles. But they put a little hook and eye at the bottom just to make something a bit easier and quicker. So, of course, every time I put them on now, there's this hook and eye that Vivienne Westwood didn't put on, but the National Theatre did. So I can't wear them without thinking of the hundreds of times we did the quick changes.
So you've got a little black dress, have you, Ken? Some high boots with buckles all up the front?
I got a costume that I'd quite like to burn. I mean,
Tell us.
Yeah, I was in the Country Wife, which is I had a blonde wig that kept sort of turning inside out, like sort of spaniel's ears with things on it, and I had this hat on top of that, and I had these shoes, and they designed the floor of the set with slightly different levels between tile to tile. So I had this sword across the back of me, and my foot was constantly giving me the message that I was stepping on someone's costume. And I don't think I've ever been so miserable on stage. And,
Oh.
and I took to going to the nurse and getting B12 shots to get on stage.
Oh,
I mean, it was
God,
actually,
really?
yes, it was that alarming. No, you can do that with some shows. You just get into a bad state about it. And this was The Country Wife, which is supposed to be this wonderful romp.
Yeah.
This wasn't. And what happened, one performance, is that Ben Kingsley, who was playing Sparkish, and his was the most perfectly realised performance I'd ever seen. It was all worked out. It was like a Fabergé egg. It was completely sorted. And this Bank Holiday Monday, Ben Kingsley got an ear infection, and there were no mobiles then. And so the poor understudy had been to the seaside for the day. He didn't know any of this, and he was coming in to the show, and there was a line of them waiting for him. And they put him into the costume, and we rehearsed one scene with him, which was supposedly the one he knew. And we thought, well, if that's the one you know, we are in such trouble. And it was worse than you could ever imagine. All of the rest of the cast had to stand like greyhounds in the slips, in the wings, waiting to see what he said next. Because he was cutting whole swathes of the play.
Oh, my God.
And myself and Polly Adams, our courtly love scene in the second half, disappeared completely, for which we were endlessly grateful. But there was one line that Sparkish had, and Ben Kingsley used to play it with great verve. Never go, but I do not love thee more than a new acquaintance. Nothing. This guy said, don't worry, I like you as much as someone I've just met. Huge laugh, huge laugh. And I saw him before the show on the phone, calling up all his friends, getting them in to see the show.
Oh, no.
And then doing the show with him, I thought, I can't believe he did that. I can't believe he wanted them all there for this.
Did you go on to have a career
We never
in the
saw him
theatre?
again. We never
So do you have, I mean, obviously we're here in the shed and the Cottesloe is being refurbished, but do you have a special place in the building, or very, not private place in the building, that sounds a bit dodgy, but somewhere when you're back, you always feel, yeah, I'm home now at the National. Special place.
I know the dressing rooms have got, there's something rather clinical and sterile about them, but I quite like them because they all look out onto this sort of inner, well, to call it a courtyard wouldn't be quite right. It's sort of an inner...
It's a courtyard designed by Stalin.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Prison camp, is that what you're meaning
Well,
here?
the great thing is you can wave, you know, you shout across and you talk to other actors and you can wave and you can see people half undressed and who forget to close the curtains, and it's very funny. But I particularly like dressing room 202 because it's the only one that hasn't, that's kind of open plan. It's your little section to put your makeup on isn't divided, and it's got a bathroom. And I was given that when I did His Dark Materials. So and because we were there for so long, I made it very homely, and so that's got a special place in my heart.
I've never had a bathroom, I have to say. Anyway.
Very competitive actors. You
I think they give the bathrooms to girls. I don't know.
I know,
why,
it's one of those
you know,
things, girls.
So that's my special place, really. But I like the dressing rooms, but they are being refurbished, apparently.
Are they?
They're having a bit of an upgrade, which is good news.
What about you?
I'm afraid I'm working at the moment at the Bush Theatre, and there's nowhere to lie down. And you do have a little flat here, which is rather sort of pleasant, and just the same answer really. And I know that sometimes when people were travelling on the Eurostar the next morning, when the Eurostar used to go from Waterloo, they knew when the night watchman went around, and they used to stay here all night, get up early in the morning and catch the train. I mean, people did live here. And when you rehearsed a play in the day and performed a show at night, and you could get an evening standard in the building, you did spend most of your life here.
At least there were terraces and outside as well. Now, I'm very mindful that you both are on stage later, and I've been told not to wear you out.
Yeah.
Although Kenneth is now
I don't know if you can see these. This is Susie Littler, who played the country wife. This is a photo that I took of her. This is Mary Miller in Lark Rise in the Cottesloe. It was a technique that I had of taking photos in the afternoon with all the lights on. I don't know if you can see it, but it actually looks like it's hand-coloured. And all this was with the assistance of Michael Mayhew, who I talked of earlier, who was the photographer here. So, and also, I was allowed to put on a platform of a one-man show, which James Fenton, who was then the critic for the Sunday Times, saw, and he said, you must do that at the Edinburgh Festival. It was called From Kipling to Vietnam, and I put it on at the Edinburgh Festival and lost a lot of money. Nobody came to see it. But I thought, you know, James Fenton, good review in the Sunday Times, it would be great. But nevertheless, it stayed with me all my life, and I've done bits of it here and there, and actually did my own programme of the Barrack Room Ballads, the kitchen section, the Kipling section on the radio. And I wouldn't have ever put that show on without having the facilities that were available here. And they let me design the show. They found me a drummer to play the drums. And Michael Mayhew found slides of Kipling and all the images that I wanted. And I'm eternally grateful for that.
Well, I mean, that is brilliantly segueing into the last question. So thank you for that, because the last one is the fantasy programming. The idea of if you were in charge for the day, if you were the artistic director, your morning, matinee and evening. And in fact, you'd said that you would put that on in your morning production. So what would be your matinee evening? Well,
I did do an afternoon show here called A Celebration of Pinter. And it was quite extraordinary because it had about maybe 50 actors sitting there on stage. 4 of us had played Aston, 4 of us. There was myself, there was Douglas Hodge, there was Roger Lloyd Pack, and there was the one who plays the King of England, what's he called? Colin Firth. and Colin got to do part of Aston's speech. We were slightly envious, but it was quite apparent that we all wanted to be in Harold's cricket team. And Harold was dead, and there was a full house, and there was a huge image of Harold at the back of the theatre, a wonderful photograph of him. And I remember, when it was all over, calling it a theatre and seeing Antonia Fraser sitting on her own, waiting for them to turn off the lights on the photo.
Oh, God.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, Harold wasn't religious, but this was a religious afternoon.
But that was that was the right tribute for him.
Yes, absolutely. His words.
Yeah. Leslie, what about you?
Well,
I'm not sure we should even follow that, actually.
I know, it is hard to follow. But complete contrast, mine would be a day of entertainment and laughs. I'd like to start the morning with the Cat in the Hat and bring my little granddaughter. I'd like to have Guys and Dolls in the afternoon.
Yeah. It's all right, it's bound to be back, don't worry.
Perfect matinee. And then in the evening, I just want to keep laughing and watch One Man, Two Governors again.
Yeah.
You can keep all the other stuff.
Keep all the other stuff.
A day of laughs.
All right, the Oris Dyer, things like that.
I mean, listen, but just a wonderful day of, you know, pure top of the range entertainment.
Yeah.
You know, entertainment that's kind of so brilliantly done.
Yes.
In the way that not every musical is done brilliantly, not every comedy is done brilliantly, but those two particularly here were done so brilliantly.
Yes.
So it would be a day of laughs for me.
I think that is a brilliant way to finish this. I mean, you have both been so generous with your time. You're both working very hard at the moment. You have to rush off to different theatres now. But it's just that sense always when you listen to actors doing these. I know many of you have been to National Histories, the sense of all the other work by other actors that you all admire so much, as well as your own. And I think that is one of the things that's been most joyous about the celebration of the 50 years. Later on today at 6 o'clock, if you haven't had enough of The Shed, Charles Kay and Fiona Shaw will be in here. And then tomorrow, unfortunately, Joan Plowright can't do her event with Nick Heitner. But Nick Heitner is doing, and you both mentioned it, Old Vic Voices at 6 o'clock in the Shed with a couple of people, including Gordon Granger, the people who were part of the earlier companies there. But ladies and gentlemen, could you give an enormous round of applause for Kenneth Cranham and Lesley Manville?